Shabbat Shalom, and this is 10 minutes of Torah. Not Purim Torah, not too serious Torah, but 10 minutes of Torah. Well, there's no such thing maybe as too serious Torah. Maybe not. Maybe there is something that is too serious Torah, because there's a lot of serious things in the Torah. But Purim Torah is something that we talk about around the holiday of Purim. Purim Torah is the opposite of serious Torah. It's joking Torah, something that might cause us to laugh or to be silly or things like that. So there's Purim Torah, there's, too serious Torah, and there's 10 minutes of Torah. Well, actually, I'm going to combine this week all three of those. 10 minutes, of course, is 10 minutes, but I've got some Purim Torah and I've got some very serious Torah in the context of that Purim Torah. Now, this week's Torah portion is called Tzav. It is the second portion in the book of Leviticus, Vayikra. And it continues to delineate the different sacrifices that our ancestors made in the desert first, and then, of course, when there was a temple in Jerusalem. But I don't want to speak about them this Shabbat, but rather to speak about Purim. You see, Purim is a holiday that cannot fall on Shabbat. Often it's in the middle of the week. When do you talk about Purim? And of course, when you're listening to the Megillah, or when you're there to listen to the Megillah, you're dressed up in costumes and having fun and making noise. So you don't have too much Torah when it's being read. But there is some very interesting things to say about Purim. And although Purim cannot fall on Shabbat itself, it can lead into Shabbat. And in a very real sense, it does lead into Shabbat, because just prior to Shabbat, we have what is called Shushan Purim. Now, just to confuse you a bit, but you have regular Purim and Shushan Purim. And you probably don't know as much about Shushan Purim because we don't celebrate Shushan Purim here in the United States, or even in most places in Israel. They celebrate Purim on the exact same day that we do, on the 13th of the month of Adar. But people who lived in the famous city of Shushan, that is the place where the story of Purim takes place, they celebrated Purim not on the 13th, but on the next day, the 14th. And we learn that cities which had a wall around them at the time of Joshua, when the Israelites conquered the land of Israel, any city that had a wall around it, just like Shushan, which had a wall around it, should celebrate Purim not on the 13th of the month of Adar, but on the 14th, because that is the date that the people of Shushan celebrated Purim. Today, there's only one city for certain that we count as having those walls, and that is Jerusalem. So Jerusalem, when you're in Jerusalem, Purim is a day later. There are those who also celebrate Shushan Purim in the city of Tiberias. Doesn't have a wall today, but it did in ancient times. So right now, Jerusalem, that's the main city that celebrates Shushan Purim. That is to say, the day which the citizens of Shushan celebrated Purim, the day after the rest of us celebrate Purim. But it's a day that kind of continues Purim. There's very little. We don't read the Megillah here on that day. You don't give out, gifts to the poor as you do on Purim Day, or mishloach manot, goodie bags, whatever you want to call them, treats to friends. You don't do that on Shushan Purim. It's all done on Purim itself. You probably eat a few leftover hamantash on Shushan Purim, that I would say. But that can lead into Shabbat. So you've got, like, as we had this year, Wednesday night and Thursday, regular Purim. Thursday night and Friday, Shushan Purim. Now, what are the two lessons that I want to talk about from the book of Esther? There's lots and lots to learn from Esther. Esther is a fascinating book. It's the funniest book in the entire Bible. But there is some serious Torah learning, that is, involved in it also. You see, first of all, Esther is the first book of the Torah that calls us Jews. That's what Mordechai is called. Ish Yehudi, a Jewish person. Prior to this, we're called Israelites. Mordechai is the first one to be called a Jew. And Haman is the first one to articulate something of great importance to us as Jews. What does Haman say? This is in chapter 3 of the Megillah. Haman says to King Achashverosh, Yeshno am echad mifuzar umifurad bein ha'amim. There is, says Haman, a certain people, and they are spread out among all of the other peoples. And Haman says to the king, those people, their laws are different than ours. And they actually don't even obey the king's law. That is the first classic statement of anti-Semitism. That Jews are different, that we're spread out among all the other peoples, that we're everywhere, and ultimately, that we're not loyal. It comes in the book of Esther. That's serious Torah. That's something we always have to be on guard. We should always think about not how different we are from other people. We are different. Every people is different. But what human beings have in common. That's the opposite of Haman. Haman wants to divide. Yes, you have different kinds of people. People speak different languages. They have different customs. That's fine. But what's important is not what divides us, but what we share. So that's the first piece of Torah, which I think is just very important from the book of Esther, from this book, which, as I said, is a very humorous book, but a very serious piece of Torah for us. Now, the second, I think, truly great lesson occurs in the very next chapter, chapter 4. You see, Esther comes to Mordechai because he's sitting in the gate in sackcloth and ashes, and she's embarrassed, and she wants him to get dressed and take off the sackcloth and ashes, and Mordechai refuses to do so. And then Mordechai says something amazing to Esther. Mordechai says, you know this decree that the evil Haman has made? Don't think that even though you're in power, you're the queen, don't think you will be spared. And perhaps, he says to Esther, perhaps this is the reason why you became queen. Now that's such a great statement by Mordechai. It's not that we believe that people achieve certain status in life with that purpose, but once you're there, sometimes, and we've all experienced this in life, sometimes you're the right person at the right time, and you can say, like Mordechai says to Esther, on a certain level, you should know that you have this position, and you have to be the one to act in the moment of action. Maybe that's why Mordechai says to Esther, you became queen to do something for your people, something we should think about when we come across a difficult moment. Maybe that's why we're there, to help someone else out. This has been 10 Minutes of Torah, not Purim Torah, and not too serious. Shabbat Shalom.